is the voice of Maui.
Welcome to The Nature of Your Nature. Come home to You Know More with Dr. Valerie Simonson on KAKU 88.5 FM, the voice of Maui, broadcasting from Akaku Maui Community Media Center in downtown Kahului. Aloha. This is Dr. Valerie Simonson, and do we have a treat today? We have the return of Harriet Witt, one of the most amazing people on the planet. Harriet, tell us a little bit about yourself. And remember to tell us about your website, too. I love going to your website.
I don't know what to say about myself, except that I learned the hard way about the nature of your nature. And what I learned wasn't just about my nature. It was about our nature. So I would hate for anybody else to have to go through what I went through. So I feel a responsibility to share what I went through. I think you and I have talked about the fact that why I never had children. I took birth control pills when I got married in 1967. I took birth control pills that were marketed before they were adequately tested.
Whoa.
But I didn't know that because the marketers conceal that. The only thing I knew is that somewhere within a few months of starting on the birth control pills, I started having these blinky lights in front of my eyes. Really blindingly bright blinky lights jumping around, followed by an excruciating headache that was quite disabling. And so I didn't know that this is what is called migraines, but later found that out. Anyway, so I went to an eye doctor to find out why my eyes were behaving the way they were behaving, and the eye doctor couldn't explain anything. Then I went to my MD who had prescribed the birth control pills, and he didn't have any explanation for what I was going through. And then at some point after months, I began to realize that I existed in the gap between their academic disciplines, or the chasm between their academic disciplines, and that I was basically an experiment of some sort, because that's what happens if you fall into the chasm between academic disciplines or scientific disciplines, And then one day, months later, the blinky lights filled my entire visual field, and I couldn't see anything at all. I was completely blind.
Whoa.
And it happened to be when my husband was away on a business trip. And so I was pretty freaked out because I wanted to make a phone call for help, but I couldn't see the phone. This is before cell phones when you had to.
Yeah, we had the dials.
Yeah, the rotary. But I couldn't see the phone,
Right,
So I have a very vivid and still visceral memory of sitting on the floor next to the phone, quite freaked out because my husband was gone. I couldn't see, I couldn't use the phone. And at that point, something that I still can't explain, but I feel it's very relevant to this topic of you know more and the nature of your nature. Okay, at that point when I was sitting on the floor by the phone, every cell in my body just screamed at me. Maybe scream isn't the right word, but it was loud and clear. Stop taking the pill. It was just totally clear to me that I needed to do that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I did. And about 45 minutes later, my vision returned.
That's quick.
It wasn't, yeah. So it was only 45 minutes, but of course, during those 45 minutes, I didn't know.
Oh, gosh, how scary.
Yeah. So anyway, 45 minutes, my vision returned. But my menstrual periods never returned.
Really?
And months and months went by, and I wasn't menstruating. And I knew that wasn't a sign of health. So I started to go to a gynecologist. And I don't remember all the details of that one. I went to the gynecologist for well over a year, regular appointments well over a year. And the gynecologist wasn't able to do anything about it, except he told me that my hormone levels had dropped down to the level of like a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old.
Wow.
And my uterus had shrunk up to the size of an 80-year-old. And that was as
Really?
much as the gynecologist was able to tell me. And then the gynecologist told me to do various things that were supposed to help, but they didn't. And eventually I realized that all the things the gynecologist was advising me to do were things that were designed to get me pregnant. And I was thinking, wait a minute, if I get pregnant before I get healthy, that doesn't seem like a good idea. Didn't seem like common sense, And then at one point he advised me to take a certain medication, and I have long since forgotten the name of it, but I knew that everybody said it had horrific side effects, and I also knew it wasn't intended for the purpose that, it was used for some whole other thing. Okay. So I asked him, why are you prescribing this? And he said, we don't know, but it works.
Wow.
And there was something about that we don't know, but it works, that just set off an alarm bell inside me. And I realized that even though I had spent probably 2 years going to this guy, it was time to stop.
Yeah.
And exactly 1 moon cycle later, my menstrual periods returned.
Wow.
And so the whole thing about women and the moon cycle is fascinating to me, not from an academic, since then it became intellectually interesting. At that time it was just, whoa, thank you, nature.
Yeah.
And the nature of our nature. And it was just incredible gratitude, because it was really scary, what I was,
Yeah.
So the whole thing of the connection between women and the moon is fascinating, especially because for a lot of men, the synchrony between women and the moon is still somewhat suspect. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody when I say that, but it's just that there's a lot that's kind of missing from the industrial mindset, the contemporary industrial mindset. So I'm thinking probably the best way to explore the connection between women and the moon. There's no way to understand the connection between women and the moon unless you go back billions of years to when all of life was in the ocean. Because that connection between women and the moon, or that synchrony between women and the moon, that synchrony was laid down long before there were humans.
Right.
And if you just look at it from a human perspective, as many people do, because that's how our culture is, our culture doesn't think much about other species or about deep time. I mean, just today on the radio, I heard somebody say, way back in 2008. Like way back. Anyway, so our culture doesn't think much about other species, and it doesn't think much about deep time. But if we want to understand the nature of our nature, and some of which involves this correlation, this synchrony between women and the moon, we have to go back to the deep time, to when all of life was in the ocean. And am I making any sense here?
100%. Yep.
So what I've found out about when all of life was in the ocean, to understand how it was when all of life was in the ocean, and it was that way for billions of years. I mean, land life is pretty recent. There's no way to understand that unless we understand the tides.
Right.
Because it all comes down to the tides.
Yes, it does.
And pretty much everybody knows that we have tides because of the moon. But that's pretty much what, as far as most people's knowledge goes. So it feels to me, in terms of my wish to have other people not go through what I went through, it's worth looking at the connection between the tides and the moon. So the reason the moon causes the tides is because it's so close to us. And for example, the light from the sun takes 8 minutes to get here. The light from the moon takes 1.5 seconds to get here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the moon's really, really close. And because it's so close, its gravity is just pulling at the Earth, pulling at the Earth, pulling at the Earth. And the liquid part of the Earth moves.
Which the Earth is at least 75% water, right?
Yes. Yeah. 70% of the surface of the Earth is water. Yeah. So that's the other thing that's hugely important. Thank you that I neglected to say.
That's all right. You got it.
Well, if we want to understand the nature of our nature, it's good to think in terms of deep time. It's good to think in terms of all the other species besides us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to think of the fact that the surface of the Earth is 70% water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can't possibly understand the nature of our nature if we don't consider those things. Yeah. So, so the moon causes the tides just because its gravity is so powerful because it's so close. But the moon also regulates the tides, and that's the part that most people haven't been told about. Or maybe it was just not explained very well in school, and so they forgot. I'm not sure. But that's the part that's important. It's the rhythm, it's the cycle, and therefore the synchrony. Mm. Yeah. So the reason that the moon regulates the tides are so predictable. I mean, we all know how precisely predictable they are, and that's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, anytime something as big as tides is that predictable, it's like, wow, this is really helpful to have that predictability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the reason for that is because the moon is constantly orbiting us. Mm-hmm. And because it's constantly orbiting us, it rises 50 minutes later each day, 50 minutes later each day, and high tide is 50 minutes later each day.
Oh, wow. So
you can see, duh. Yeah. Okay, so let me see what's the best. I don't want to get too... So I mentioned that, go back to the experience, the pain that I had to go through to learn about the nature of my nature. Yeah. When I realized that the gynecologist wasn't helping and was probably right on the verge of doing serious damage if I had continued following his advice. As I said, I hadn't menstruated in a couple of years at that point. But as soon as I stopped going, or one moon cycle after I stopped going to him, I started menstruating again. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing about the moon cycle, we call it moon cycle, but there's another word for it. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this, the word Moonth.
Yes.
Moonth. One Moonth is how long the moon takes to orbit us.
Yeah.
And today most people refer to it as one moon cycle because Moonth is an old-fashioned word, but you can see it's clearly what it's the origin of.
Yeah.
Because the moon is constantly orbiting us, that's why we have this predictability in the tides. And that cycle is roughly 28, 29 days. It varies a little bit from one cycle to the next. But there's a word for it, and the word is Moonth. Mm. And what a lot of people don't realize today, and again, it's just part of our industrial disconnect from nature, I think, is that a month is a really powerful cycle because it governs all the feeding in the ocean and it governs all the breeding in the ocean.
Oh, I didn't know about the breeding. That's
the
cool.
The feeding and the breeding, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. All of the feeding and all of the breeding in the ocean follows a cycle, and it's that monthly cycle. Wow. And the reason for that is that all the original ocean creatures, you know, the fish and the coral and all those guys, they don't have any genitals. Mm-hmm. They never needed genitals because what they do is they release their sperms and eggs at just the right point in the monthly cycle so that the sperms and the eggs meet. And to meet is to mate.
Wow.
And so there's no need of intercourse because the tides take care of that.
Yeah.
And different species release their sperms and eggs at different points in the monthly cycle, depending on their water circulation needs and other needs. But the tides take care of all that, the timing on all that.
Wow.
So no genitals are needed. And okay, so I'm just kind of offering that as an example of how powerful the monthly cycle is, despite the fact that most people don't know the word Moonth.
Right. And that's Moonth.
Yes, Moonth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that word Moonth was always very important to us because originally our calendar months were actual months.
Right. 28 days.
Yeah, yeah. And that was that way for long before anybody had recorded history.
Right.
Okay. So originally our calendar months were actual months. But then what happened is Julius Caesar invented July,
Yes.
named it after July, after himself, Julius, and stuck that in the calendar.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And then Caesar Augustus invented August, named that after himself, and stuck that into the calendar.
I
And
didn't know that.
messed up the calendar. So now September is the 9th month, but if you know Latin, you know that SEPT means 7.
Right.
People in their 70s are called septuagenarians.
Uh-huh.
October is now the 10th month, but we all know OCT, as in octagon, means 8. And November is now the 11th month, and this one's not so well known, but if you're a Roman Catholic, you know that a novena is a 9-day prayer.
Mm.
And December is the 12th month now, but everybody knows DEC, as in decade, and decimal is 10.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see, what happened there
Yeah.
when Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus inserted themselves into the calendar. And so now our calendar has these months that are just totally artificial constructs. They don't correspond to anything in the natural world, but we're living our lives by them.
Yeah.
That's this is not academic anymore. We're scheduling our lives by these things that we call months.
Yeah.
But that's not how nature is scheduling anything. Am I making any sense here?
You are, and one of my peers, we were talking on my way here, and they were saying, all of this academic, they're a doctor, and all this academic things that I've been taught and making plans and, following a schedule, I just letting it all go. And I'm getting back into what my nature is saying.
Interesting.
And that requires getting out in nature. They are a kayaker.
Oh, okay.
And getting reconnected and operating their life from that place rather than where they've been operating for decades.
Interesting. That's a big leap.
It's brave.
Yeah.
But there isn't really an option now as we've gone through COVID.
Right.
And we've talked about that, how when we came back to ourselves and then we don't tolerate things anymore,
right,
like we used to perhaps. And now there's another whole shift in evolution, which is either do it or it's not going to work so well.
Yes, something's intensifying. It's almost like nature's turning up the volume or something.
Mm-hmm.
So if a little mistake is a big mistake now.
Yeah. There's not a lot of room. You really get to listen, like you did when you were young and said, I figured this out. This is from the pills that I'm taking, right?
I didn't figure it out. My body knew.
But that is you.
Oh, okay.
Your body is where you live, right?
And
and you listened and you took action, which was very brave, and especially at that time in history.
Yeah.
Being a woman, speaking to someone that maybe knows something more than you, or we're taught that they are. I remember when I first started in medicine, one of my peers was, we were having this big argument about how to treat a client, and neither one of us were budging. So I called one of my old mentors, who Dr. Kurtz. He'd been around for 100 years, and I said, I just don't know how to manage this. And he says, they don't have mud on their sandals yet. Oh. And I said, what do you mean, mud on your sandals? And they said, as doctors, we're taught we walk on water.
Oh my goodness.
And until you get your feet muddy, you're not going to be able to really get down into the roots of your service to the planet. And when I brought that to my peers and brought that to them, they went, oh my gosh. And I watched their practice change dramatically when they quit walking on water and started listening to their clients. Like, one of them was in a coma, and they didn't know what to do, and asked for my input. I said, just talk to them. They said, well, they're in a coma. And I said, well, talk to them. They'll hear you. And then he went silence with, and listen. And then what they heard was there was some disagreements among the family, and they needed to straighten that out before that it was a mother that was in this coma. So they shared that with the family and in front of the person in bed, and they woke up.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So there's hearing. Okay, wow, okay.
Or I don't know if you want to even just call it hearing, but sensing what is right.
I paused there because I realized hearing isn't the right word, but I couldn't think of another word.
Yeah, because we're taught to compartmentalize ourselves. I see what you're talking about. I hear what you're saying. But there is also this other thing where we just know.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's the you know more. It's that kind of, okay, right.
And I just have a bad feeling in my belly. Or somebody asked me the other day, how do you know that? And I said, just feel it in my body. This isn't right.
Right.
And I'm not going to go down that alley. You guys can, but I'm not going to.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. Also, you mentioned the word evolution. How did you happen to bring that up?
Well, I don't know, but that's one of my favorite things right now, is we're talking about these bodies that are evolving.
Oh, and they are the product of evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And our soul is evolving.
Okay.
And where we were taught that they're separate, there is really no separation except for when we are separated by some outside force, maybe trauma. Yeah,
trauma will do that, Okay. No, because what I was thinking, you just reminded me of something that I didn't mention when we were talking about the monthly cycle being the nature of nature and months being just artificial constructs. But people are living their lives by these constructs, and that puts us out of sync in ways that we're not recognizing, in ways that are creating stress. And then we go hit somebody else on the head to alleviate the stress,
Yeah.
Possibly. Okay. So the word evolution is also really important in terms of the path that I went down as a result of what I went through.
Right.
The damage to my reproductive, my reproductive system couldn't make babies. And so that set me on a path of, okay, what's this all about? So as I started learning more about the relationship between women and the synchrony between women's fertility cycle, women's menstrual cycle, and the moon, I realized there's no way to really fully understand it in a way that's acceptable to the science community unless you go back billions of years to when all of life was in the ocean. And as I said, all of life in the ocean is, all of the feeding in the ocean and all of the breeding in the ocean is regulated by the monthly cycle. Okay, and but then some cataclysmic thing happened. Nobody knows quite what caused it, but sea levels dropped precipitously at some point, and I don't remember how many.
I didn't know that.
I don't remember nobody knows the exact date, but
Sure, we weren't there.
if you Google it, I don't remember, but at some point.
Unless you were a dinosaur.
right. No, this is when everything was still in the water.
Oh,
right. Long before that, yeah.
Long before that.
That was another cataclysm.
Yeah.
But so anyway, at some point, sea levels fell precipitously, and that's known. It's in the people who study the patterns on the ocean floor and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they've determined that. Okay, so when sea levels fell. And I think you and I have talked about this before because that's fascinating to me. When sea levels fell, there was a whole bunch of fish that were finding themselves more and more often on dry land. Mm-hmm. And what do we do now?
Yeah.
And somebody had to get creative, right? And so the fish, and obviously on dry land you have to hang on to things in ways that you don't have to do in water, Mm-hmm. But fins aren't very good for hanging on because they're not designed for that. So the fish who survived are the ones who extended their fins into fingers. Mm-hmm. And I love that word finger because you can see where it comes from. So obviously this is a radio program, so I can't hold up my hand and really, but if people listening can just feel the bones in the back of your hand or look at the bones in the back of your hand, if you flex your hand, it's very clear that those bones in the back of your hand are fish fins. And then, they extend it into fingers for the sake of getting a hold on land and climbing around. And same with our feet. Our toes, that word toe doesn't sound as cool as finger, but but there's two main sets of fins in fishes, the one in the front and the one in the back. Okay, right. And both of those fins, both of those sets of fins extended into what we today call the digits on our hands and the digits on our feet. Obviously, there's still more webbing remaining in our feet, which is why we're able to swim as well as we are. Yeah, I mean, if your feet had toes as long as your hands, as long as your fingers are, we might have a hard time swimming. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's really fascinating is where you can feel your fishy ancestry is if you put your index finger in the opening of your ear.
Index finger in the opening of the ear.
Yeah, and then with your thumb, feel the sharp bend in your jaw just below that. Sure. And that opening in the ear and the sharp bend in the jaw just below that, that's a fish gill. Oh. And if you open and close your mouth a few times, you can...
Yeah.
Okay, that's a fish gill. That repurposed for air breathing.
Interesting.
Breathing on that. And then there's one more thing, which is our lungs. Our lungs used to be what's called a swim bladder in fish. Fish have to maintain a certain optimal water depth. If you go too deep, you get crushed by the pressure, and then and different species of fish have to maintain different levels. And a fish would exhaust itself if it had to keep swimming all the time to maintain that optimal level. Right. So fish evolved something called a swim bladder, and they just inflate it and deflate it, and it keeps them at the right level. Well, once the fish were on dry land, they didn't need their swim bladder anymore, and it got repurposed into lungs. So we have, some really interesting... we have some interesting, fascinating fishy ancestry. But the really fascinating part, as if that were not fascinating enough, is how they solve the problem of reproduction. Because now they're on land and they can't just release their sperms and their eggs in the water at the right time in the monthly cycle. Like, now what do we do? So the ones that survived were the ones where the females carried a little bit of the ocean inside their bodies. It's called the womb.
The womb. Wow.
And it still has that synchrony with the monthly cycle.
It totally does. Yeah.
And when a fetus is in the womb, it's aquatic. Mm-hmm. And when it's ready to swim out. It does, and then it becomes air breathing. So you can see
Wow.
something being repeated here. Am I making any sense?
You're making a lot of sense. And, I didn't get that in biology or any of the classes that I took over the years. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I found it in a number of different books, but it's not in your textbooks.
No. No.
Darwin started
Right.
this line of think, was looking that way.
Darwin.
But the people who supported Darwin mostly just supported his survival of the fittest,
Right.
that part, and they didn't always pay too much attention to some of his other insights. And it's not just the women too. I mean, male or female, the intracellular fluids in your body, the blood, sweat, and tears, they're salty. That intracellular fluid has the same salinity as the ocean, the same acid-alkaline ratio as the ocean, and the same mineral content as the ocean. So we're basically ambulatory bags of ocean.
And the spinal fluid.
Oh.
It actually, when it comes, if a person were to have a head injury and it comes out their ears, it looks just like salt water. And I've been able to be with some of that, and it's salty. It tastes salty.
Interesting, the spinal fluid.
Yeah.
And it comes out their ears when a person has a head injury?
Yeah, it can.
Oh.
If there's a crack. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the ways you know that somebody's got a really bad head injury is you look in the ears.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But it's salty.
It's salty. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I don't know. I mean, how does that make you feel about the nature of your nature when you realize that we're bags of ocean water that walk?
I love it. I love the concept of it and to expand my brain a little bit, but also brings me into Taoism a little bit, which is the Tao of water. Water always finds its way.
Oh, wow.
And we as humans, the resiliency that we have, there's something about, like today I was talking to a peer and I'm like, my word, how much more can they go through? That resiliency, yeah? And they're able to navigate the waters, and especially right now where there's so much water, and there's big waves hitting us and bringing our emotions are being triggered right now by all of the things that are happening on the outside of us, but also inside of us. Because we are evolving as human beings on this planet. And maybe it's just my age, but there is definitely a deeper awareness that one of these days I won't be here.
Right.
And what is it that I can do to help to make this journey better for someone else? Right. By sharing things like what we're talking about right now. And you asked in the very beginning, what would a third grader need to know about their body or something like that? And this is your body. This is the place you live.
Nice. This is the place you live. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah. Just that one sentence is huge.
Yeah, I got that from Andrea Marino, who does somatic healing type of work. And it's so powerful. And through socialization and all of those other things that we've talked about in the past, it's like, who am I? And then as we go through age, right, at 20, we'd start doing something, 30s, 40s, 50s. And I remember one of my peers, she lived to be 101 day. And she said, 60s is great, 70s, incredible, 80s, fantastic. And 90s, she said, I think I know who I am. Yeah.
Well, I love what you're saying about, I didn't make the connection between, our ability to go with the flow. If we're that much water, and our ancestors spent that many billions of years in the water, then, I see what you're getting at. We have a capacity for going with the flow.
But that doesn't fit society at large. And I'm going to bring in an example. The other day, one of my peers has redone their website, started a new business, and and they're part of our nonprofit, who is sponsoring us today. You know more. And I said, I'd like to have a new bio for you and a new picture if you're willing to do that. And they gave the bio, but then they were like, well, I have another photo, but it's not very professional. And I looked at it and I went, but this is who you are. Now, the other one is professional. It's based in the patriarchal, right? You're supposed to look a certain way. You need to have a jacket on, and you have the white shirt, the whole thing to make you professional. And I said, hey, you get to drive your own boat here. Do you want your other one in there? I'd love to see that. I love it when people embrace their authenticity.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. There's a big difference between that genomic capacity for going through with the flow and the way that our culture is. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Oh, speaking of genomic, that reminds me, the other thing that I find is really helpful here in terms of understanding our relationship with the monthly cycle. Most people, when you say moon, think of a round rock in the sky. So instead, think of what you've heard in old cowboy movies. There's always some Native American guy in there who says, many moons ago, such and such happened.
Right,
okay.
right.
And the important thing here is not the cowboy movies, but they kept alive an expression that I'm really glad was kept alive. Yeah. When the Native American person says many moons ago, he or she is not talking about the moon as an object. He's talking about the monthly cycle. Because it's how people measured time in those days, because and you and I have talked about this before, for the initial 99% of our human existence, the sky was our clock, the sky was our calendar, the sky was our compass, and everybody was paying attention to it. And so, the monthly cycle is one aspect of nature's time, So many moons ago really means many moonths ago. And Native American people all understand that. When they say many moons ago, they're not counting rocks in the sky. Yeah. And the other thing is, there's another Native American expression. When a woman is menstruating, they say she's on her moon.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean she's sitting on a rock in the sky. It means she's at that point in the monthly cycle where she's bleeding. Yeah. So again, we kind of have to depart from our industrial mindset to fully appreciate the power of what we inherited from our pre-human ancestors. Yeah, that whole thing. Am I making any sense with regard to the indigenous people? Is that what you're getting at with the Taoism?
Yes.
Too? Okay.
Yes, in all the cultures that I've studied all over the world, there is that connection.
Right.
And water and the moon are the parameters that are the most honored.
Right.
And the sun plays a role too, but the moon is the cycle.
Right.
I mean, we definitely have proven that, right, with science. And you go to an ER on a full moon, you're going to have some different characters than you would on a new moon. And thus the term lunatics.
Yes.
I think you taught me that many years ago. And the other thing that I want to just bring up here is, as far as with women especially, but for men too, men have cycles too.
Right.
And like so many female problems I have found is because we're trying to work every day. We're not in sync, right? And then we have ovarian problems, we have breast cancer problems, we have all of these problems. They can't get pregnant. Well, they're working these crazy, crazy hours.
Yeah.
And leaving technology on at night, light. I mean, I remember when I first learned decades ago about you darken a room for women to sleep, to get their hormones in balance. right? Get back into the dark.
Right.
Get back in the deep.
Yeah.
But there is a risk with that, because once you get into that, you don't come back and go, you know what, I'm okay with that. I'm going to put in an 80-hour week and I'm going to be okay with that. That doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Once people get in tune with their nature,
Right.
which is dependent on the moon, and that's all over the world.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's a big ask for a lot of people to even expand that part of their brain, and that's okay. We're just
It's a big ask, yeah. And yet at the same time, what's even bigger is what happens if we don't.
For sure.
Yeah.
For
You're
sure.
reminding me, when I do my stargazing programs on the boat on Saturday nights, very often there's a lot of moonlight and we can't see stars, and so we talk about the moon. And one time we were talking about what you and I just talked about, and there was a fellow there who said, couldn't the United Nations institute a monthly calendar? Because I had pointed out that there's still cultures that do have monthly calendars. For example, a lot of people are Jewish. They know that the Hebrew calendar still has real months in it.
Oh,
The Chinese calendar still has real months in it. The Hawaiian calendar still has real months. The Islamic calendar still has real months. Those calendars are a little more mathematically complex, because those calendars are tracking our relationship with the sun and the moon. The calendar that we're using in the Western world, thanks to the Roman emperors, is just tracking the relationship with the sun, but not the moon. And when you're tracking the sun and the moon, as the Chinese are doing and the Hebrews and the Muslims, well, for example, in the Chinese calendar, the new year is the second new moon after the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. So you can see how, and that's why the date's not the same every year. Okay. Yeah. And the fact that the date's not the same every year is hard for Westerners to deal with, but if you live in China, it's no big deal,
Right.
And it's just how it is, It just means those people have a little more mathematical skill than most Americans do. Now, why did I mention? Oh, yeah, somebody said, hey, couldn't the United Nations institute a monthly calendar? And I think it's a really good idea. And I don't know anybody at the UN, but maybe somebody out there in Radio Land knows somebody at the UN. Because, well, it would be good just to get us back in sync with what we're out of sync with. But also, with sea levels rising, it becomes more important to pay attention to
Hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can see, the road to Lahaina years ago, the road to Lahaina would have a little bit of spritz on it at the full moon. Now, there's way more than spritz on it.
You don't want to drive across there sometimes, right?
It goes all the way to the other side of the road, the water. Yeah, you got all that salt on your car.
And they're looking at changing the road because of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, and that reminds, did I interrupt you?
Nope.
No, something you said earlier when you first mentioned the the emergency rooms, your experience in the emergency rooms. Yeah. The other thing that feels important here in terms of getting us back in sync, when the moon is what we call full, it's always on the opposite side of us from the sun. Mm-hmm. And so you can see then what you've got. You've got the sun and the earth and the moon. I mean, there's a line here, So, like, if this is the earth and the moon's constantly going around us, once every month it goes between us and the sun, and then once every month it's on the opposite side of us from the sun. Okay. Well, when it's on the opposite side of us from the sun, that's what's called syzygy, S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y.
Oh.
And it's a powerful dynamic because it's a tugging and pulling.
Yes.
Yeah? And so that tugging and pulling of the full moon, it can be a really good yoga stretch, or it can just split you down the middle, depending on how you handle it.
Yeah.
I sense from my reading and that, there were cultures that understood how to work with that so that it feels like a really good stretch, had skills for doing that, practices for doing that. And I would love to know what you know about the practices, but there were cultures that had practices for making the most of that 180-degree angle so that they experienced it as a really good stretch. If you don't have those practices, it's just this tug of war, and you just split down the middle at some point. That's lunacy.
Yeah, that's lunacy. Yeah. And I think about it in a way of that with those energies, the pull is that there's a portal opening.
Yes.
As we're never, I mean, if you sit under a full moon in the evening, you're not the same the next day.
Right.
You're just
Right.
not.
Right.
And they call them moon baths. I mean, it's
Right.
just really can shift you.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes you don't sleep well at night because the moon is getting so large, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that goes back to the evolution of our
Yes.
of our being. This is one of the ways that we grow. Yeah.
Yes, and I like what you said about portal. Was that the word you used?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because eventually something opens.
Yeah, it does.
The question is whether it opens easefully or painfully.
Yeah.
When it opens painfully, that's the lunacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or unsupported,
Oh, okay.
right?
Unsupported.
They always have been goofy. They'd come to the full moon, or a full moon be coming around, and watch that kid. They always get a little goofy. But from my experience is that they're just a little more in tune and more what I call touched. They know things.
Oh, so when you say kids, what do you?
Like when they say growing up and there's somebody different. And those that are aware and those that aren't.
Okay.
You know,
Okay. Yeah.
Or those that go and sit under a tree and go into meditation without being taught how to meditate, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's more and more of those.
Yes, there is. I
Right.
think it's innate in all of us.
Yes.
It just gets the concrete laid over the top of it, like we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a lot of propaganda that says this is not good and all of that, but it is our nature. It is
Right.
our nature. And as we really understand this is our body, this is my body, this is my body, this is my body, this is where I live.
Right.
Then we look at, I have choices.
Okay.
Do I want to be different? Do I want to listen to that voice that spoke to you that day that said, you got to stop these birth control pills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think everybody here has had those moments where that voice just, don't do that, or take a left over here, and you just avoided a major accident, whatever that is, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So as we get in tune with that, and then have the courage to be, quote, different.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. You know, you just reminded me when you were talking about that. The first calendars were monthly calendars. And another way to say it, in the little thing that I texted you a few days ago, is our first astronomers were women.
Yes.
But they were not aiming for careers in science. They were just knowing that if they brought more babies into the world than their ecosystems could provide food for, people would be fighting over the food.
Yeah.
You know, and so they realized they had to regulate their populations. And they also saw the synchrony between the monthly cycle and their fertility cycle. And so they realized they needed to practice birth control. And to do that, they had to carefully track the lunar cycle. And if you Google, oh gosh, I have to think of the word. The earliest known calendar is 40,000 years old. I believe it's in a museum in Moscow. And it's a reindeer bone that has the monthly cycle etched on the reindeer bone. And it's preserved, I think, in Moscow. I'm not sure. But, yeah, when I get home, I'll look that up. So.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. So the first calendars were monthly calendars made by these women who were realizing that they needed to practice birth control. To this day, the word in the ancient Gaelic language of the Celtic people, the word for calendar and the word menstruation are the same word.
Oh, really? Calendar and menstruation is the same.
I don't remember what the word is, but in the Gaelic language.
Wow. Whoops, there went my thingy. But you're supposed to be off.
Also, our word for measurement, the scientific term for measurement is mensuration.
Mm-hmm.
See what the origin of that word is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there were people who were working with this cycle in very positive ways that still live on in little fragments of things like word origins and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's fun to play with. But I want to thank you for being, quote, vulnerable to share your story that can maybe help someone else. Because when we listen to our bodies, it will always tell us a yes or a no. And that's why they have dowsing and all these other things. But and there's ways we can override that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Whether drugs or, synthetic drugs
I've done it,
the other kind of drugs, we can override that. But as we return to listening,
Mm-hmm.
really listening, and then having the courage to say, that didn't work for me.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
And be able to say that with that conviction that can put you, if you're at the medical office, it can put a little red mark at the top of your file, non-compliant, right? But we want to be non-compliant these days because the theme of these days is self-sovereignty.
Okay. And let me ask you a question. You just said something really important about choice. You said, help me out here, I don't remember your exact words, something to say when you realize that you live in this body, then you realize that you have choices.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my question is about checking in with your body and to see what your body knows. When I check in with my body, is it helpful to state what the choices are, to be aware of? I'm curious about. Yeah.
It could be. There's also this, quote, voice that speaks. Back in 30, well, more than that now, but maybe 80 years ago, people that were talking to themselves or to other beings, right? They were considered to be insane.
Right.
But they probably were connected in a way and listening and communicating. And I think if we would allow ourselves to communicate with ourselves, is this the right thing? Is this the right thing? But there are things that are going to interfere with that. Lack of sleep, lack of food, peer pressure, perhaps. But the way that we turn all of that back around is to come back to let's get in nature. Like the other night, the full moon, the strawberry moon, right? I just laid there in my bed, and the moon is just coming in, and I'm just like, bathe me. Just bathe me. And let me move through this portal. I don't know what it is, but I know it's the right thing. And as we are doing more of that, nature has a heartbeat. It's not like this. It's so when we get in the natural rhythm,
yes,
then we're able to stay in the cycle,
right,
much more effectively. Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes a lot more sense. Yeah. If you ask your body for advice while you're driving through 60-mile-an-hour traffic, you might not get a clear answer.
But sometimes you do.
Or sometimes you do.
Turn right and go,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, like with the fires in 23 here, I was driving from the courthouse or the county buildings, And my truck literally pulled into here at Akaku. And I walked in, and within a few minutes, I was on the radio, or I think the radio first, and then to television, to help people with how to deal with this enormous stress.
Oh.
I didn't do anything. My truck did it.
Oh, beautiful.
You know? So when we stay in tune with nature,
Beautiful. Wow.
then we're always provided for.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But that means we
That's
get to
beautiful.
trust. We get to trust. Trust that voice.
Yes, yes. Somebody was pointing out, I forget who it was, but at this point, doesn't matter. He said, you don't have to learn how to trust. You just learn how to trust in different things than what you've been trusting in.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Yeah.
We've all been trusting in things that were not trustworthy.
Well, just like that photo I was talking about. We had the black and white suit, and, professional
Yes.
to authentic. And I was really nervous about sharing my input because they asked for my input, but I was nervous about it because I didn't want to step on any professionalism here.
I see. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's still, the decision hasn't been made because I want them to make the decision, not me. But if we just all showed up in our authentic self, we wouldn't need so many medications
Right.
out there.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I asked the question about choice because of something I've been learning from Lisa Carey in the somatics. She pointed out that the brain loves to learn, and it does. I mean, and she also pointed out that when the learning begins with noticing a difference between something and something else, difference between the way your left shoulder is and your right shoulder, or the difference between whether something is warm or cool, or, there's a million possible differences.
Right.
Yeah, but she said, once you've noticed a difference, then the brain can get to work.
Right, and the brain wants to.
And the brain wants to. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's why I was asking about what you were exploring with regard to choice.
Yeah. So thank you, Harriet, for being with
Thank
us
you.
today. And wow, we did a lot. And join us next week for The Nature of Your Nature. Come home to you no more. Ahui ho.
Maui Arts and Cultural Center announces the return of the summer